I'm Billy S, welcome back to the channel. If you're a subscriber, please consider leaving a like and commenting straight away. It is the only way to help the algorithm to pick this video up and show it to new viewers. If you're a new viewer, welcome! I want to talk about what each Soulsborne game does the best in comparison to the others. For example, if I look at Demon Souls, what is the one aspect of that game that is done better, in my opinion of course, than the rest of the series? We do that so on and so forth of the rest of the entries, and I try to avoid overlap where possible. It's a broad topic and very opinion-based, so be sure to let me know what choices you would pick in the comments below. So let's just jump right in with Demon Souls, the game that started it all. For me, this is actually a very easy entry to write, but it depends on the version of the game you're playing. PlayStation 3 Demon Souls is a vibe check. I love what they did with the aesthetics to make the game feel ethereal and otherworldly. You've got so much bloom in the visuals that help lend this dreamlike state to Boletaria, and it makes the locations you explore so striking and memorable. Who could forget wandering through the Tower of Latria and seeing the faint illumination of the Mind Flayer's lanterns? Or the beauty in the skybox of the Shrine of Storms? As despite the grey overcast clouds above, you still have those peaks of white poking through while skeletons with their glowing eyes roll towards you. The dismal, dingy darkness of the Valley of Defilement, the radiant oranges that pop in the tunnel city of Stonefang, and of course the ruined kingdom of Boletaria itself, where the war on the people is contrasted by the surprisingly well-kept walls of the fortresses you visit. It really gives the impression that this is all happening in real time, as opposed to you adventuring into ruins long abandoned. Dark Souls has a similar atmosphere and definitely has higher highs, but also horrendous lows. While Demon Souls, every bit of the world is so beautifully rendered and brought together. I just think the vibe, the energy of Demon Souls is unmatched in the series. It's a loneliness, a mysteriousness that can't be recaptured. As we saw with the remake, in a way you could say the visuals win there too, being incredibly high fidelity with gorgeous animations and a fresh coat of paint to make everything pop. And if that's your cup of tea, go off, I'm happy for you. But I can't think of Demon Souls without going straight to the original PS3 release. It's what FromSoft themselves worked on, and it's their vision. A perfect example would be the King Allant boss fight atop Boletaria's 1-4. Look at these two cutscenes side by side and tell me which you would be more intimidated and intrigued by. I suspect many will say the original. I know Bloodborne was also in contention for the vibe check, but the reality is, if you don't like its gothic aesthetics, Bloodborne won't do anything for you, whereas Demon Souls I think has a more broadly appealing fantasy atmosphere that brings more people together. That, and I really didn't want to talk about world tendency in this entry for the 60th time on this channel. Moving on to Dark Souls, it's gonna overlap with many of my previous videos, but I truly feel that this game's pinnacle of achievement is the interconnectivity of its world and how that affects the player's journey. Not every Soulsborne game strives for interconnectivity, Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, and Dark Souls 3 don't, but Bloodborne, Sekiro, and Elden Ring are the three that could also claim this category if they wanted. That being said, I don't think they have the seamlessness of Dark Souls, and in Elden Ring's case, I'll actually be bringing up this topic again in a slightly different metric, so stay tuned. Every new shortcut that leads back to Firelink Shrine is a special event, whether it's unlocking the parish elevator and seeing the vast tree that denotes the hub, unlocking the door in the aqueduct from Lower Undead Burg to find yourself in familiar grounds, or returning through New Londo after escaping Blighttown with its key. Those moments are exciting and well spaced out to allow you the opportunity to adventure before slowly finding your way back to a safe space when you need it most. The interconnectivity is also important in traversal, as it allows players to experience the game through different routes. If you start with the Master Key, you can immediately, on a new game, head down to the Valley of the Drakes. This allows you to skip the Undead Burg and its lower counterpart, the Depths, and the Blighttown Descent, while allowing you to reach the Darkroot Basin much earlier in the game, which can get you to the back of the Undead Parish. Or you can just immediately head to Blighttown via the water wheel exit. You could go and fight Sif if you really wanted to as your second boss of the game by taking the Hydra shortcut, or farming the 20k for the seal from Andre. In Bloodborne, yeah, the areas interconnect with themselves, such as Central Yharnam being this gigantic maze, but areas linking to other areas in the same fashion as Dark Souls 1 is incredibly rare. There is a reason why people are still clamoring for this style of world design to be brought back. We love interconnectivity and familiarizing ourselves with places in the game world, having real reasons to keep going back to old areas, aside from the old let's talk to this NPC for a brief snippet of dialogue like they did most recently in Lies of P. And I truly believe most Souls-likes fail to achieve Dark Souls world design because these Souls-likes are learning how to create their worlds from the Soulsborne games, whereas From Software, especially Miyazaki, have a vast pool of inspirations from the past, video games and literature that they grew up with that informed how they wanted to design their worlds. Berserk is such an obvious inspiration here. That being said, FromSoft also now copies themselves. They've become the modern blueprint for interesting world design, but that also means we're likely never going to get another mainline Soulsborne game with Dark Souls interconnectivity and world layout, which is a shame because they totally have room to improve that side of the formula. When looking at Dark Souls 2, we have to remember that this was a game not helmed by Miyazaki. He was too busy working on Bloodborne at this point, and to an extent, you can tell that his involvement was minimal. While that did lead to an overinflation of bosses that didn't need to exist and a rather lackluster endgame that was only improved once the DLCs released to bolster a rather content-tragic final act, there was one major upside to Miyazaki's absence. Dark Souls 2 was the first game in the series to throw everything at the wall and see what stuck, in the form of experimentation. I am not an expert on this topic, but I will try to go over some of the bigger changes brought about in Dark Souls 2 that had a major impact on the series moving forwards. For example, did you know that Dark Souls 2 invented power stancing, which involved holding two of the same weapon type, which gave you access to a dual-wielding moveset? This is something that has remained in the series and is still strong all the way up to Nightreign. You can thank Dark Souls 2 for allowing you to do a jumping attack with two large hammers as the Raider. Dark Souls 2 also reinvented the healing system for Souls-likes and Soulsbornes. Your Estus flask started at a low amount of healing, and you would need to find Estus shards to increase the amount of times you could use it, plus Sublime Bone Dust that you burned in Majula to increase the Estus's potency. These mechanics have returned in Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, with the latter using golden seeds in Sacred Tears. It is my personal favorite healing system, and is the variant that almost every Souls-like game since has adopted themselves. Dark Souls 2 is also known as the fashion capital of the world, with tons of unique armor sets that could see you walking down Paris Fashion Week. More importantly though, Dark Souls 2 introduced passive bonuses and effects that you could obtain by wearing specific armor, or holding specific weapons and shields, such as flat stat increases, or more fun abilities like being able to poison enemies with your rolls. Without these mechanics, Soul Level 1 runs of Dark Souls 2 would be a fucking nightmare. Not every bit of experimentation worked or was retained for future games. Bonfire Ascetics, I miss you, bring them back. Dark Souls 2 is the only game to also try heavily incorporating the torch into regular gameplay, even if most of its usage was neutered by the changes to the lighting engine, as well as the pivot they had to take with the game midway through development. But they were willing to defy the conventions that got them popular with Dark Souls, and that brave move paid dividends down the line, as when Elden Ring launched, guess what game in the series it had the most in common with? That's right, Dark Souls motherfucking 2. Delving into Yharnam always gets me excited. I truly think From Software should lean into horror aesthetics more often, as they have the chops to pull off these settings with aplomb. I mean, they basically set the game in Victorian England, what's scarier than that? However, I'd say Bloodborne is most important to the series for pushing combat in a more aggressive and fast-paced direction than its predecessors. It's very clear looking at Dark Souls 3, Sekiro, and Elden Ring that Miyazaki always wanted to up the combat speed of his games, because it's like night and day comparing Bloodborne to the previous 3 games they'd made. I don't think Bloodborne has the best combat flow in the franchise, it was just the game that started the initial switch. But what Bloodborne does have over the other games is its weapon variety, which is hilarious given technically there are less weapons in Bloodborne than any other game in the series sans Sekiro, but thanks to Bloodborne's trick weapon system, that uniqueness, charisma, nerve, and talent that is Bloodborne's weapon roster gets to shine. Each weapon has two forms, two separate movesets that you can switch between on the fly: small sword and big sword, small sword and big hammer, cane and whip, electric mace, bow blade, club that becomes a pizza cutter. Not every weapon is amazing in this game, to be fair. Bloodborne players will tell you that some are just not very good. But that's the same for any Soulsborne game, and I really do think for casual play, you can make any weapon decent enough to get through the story. For me, it comes down to, I can remember tons of weapons from Bloodborne by memory, whereas with the other games, I genuinely struggle to remember all of the major unique weapons. And that for me is all the proof I personally need. I don't even need to preface the Dark Souls 3 segment with a crazy intro. We all agreed that this was the title where FromSoft's philosophy regarding boss fights finally came into focus. As much as I love the older Souls games, the bosses are rough from a design standpoint. Demon Souls boss fights feel like proof of concepts. Dark Souls, I always think of Ornstein's dash attack and how it just jankily moves around obstacles. We don't need to talk about Dark Souls 2, and Bloodborne, the DLC is pretty great, but that endgame before the DLC released was rough. Dark Souls 3 solidified the formula for how FromSoft would make boss fights going forwards, and the magic words here were HP thresholds. Pretty much every boss in Dark Souls 3 has mechanics where after reaching specific points in their HP bar, they will either break out a few new moves to keep the battle fresh, or they'll just launch into a brand new phase to keep you on your toes. I remember when Dark Souls 3 came out, this was actually a controversial move by FromSoft. Oh, if every boss has an enraged state, then it makes the whole concept less special. You start expecting bosses to power up mid-fight. Having had a decade to think about this topic though, I think this change was for the better. It gave FromSoft more freedom to ensure that even their least important boss fights had an opportunity to show off, and it allowed the company to more meticulously design each encounter. By setting those benchmarks, you ensure that casual players all get similar experiences with each battle. There's a reason why Vort of the Boreal Valley's enraged state became such a meme online. The music, combined with the sudden changes and the complete shift in demeanor, was like nothing you'd expect from the early game of other Souls titles. And it allowed FromSoft to pull some even sneakier moves like the 3-phase Freed fight or Slave Knight Gale, where even though it's one health bar, it's very clearly set into 3 phases. This design philosophy has stuck around since Dark Souls 3, even if it truly started forming back in Bloodborne's DLC. You could easily make the case that Elden Ring has also done these boss battles really well, especially Nightreign, but I also think that some of Elden Ring's bosses are a tad overtuned on the aggressiveness and difficulty, and Nightreign is still a little too new for me to fully lean into the boss fights. Dark Souls 3 on Soul Level 1 though, I've beaten that recently, and it was just the right amount of difficulty for me, and that is what I am looking for. Okay, here is where I have to be very careful, because I live with someone who does not agree with what I'm about to say. And to my wonderful partner whom I love very much, if you are watching this, please skip ahead to Elden Ring. This isn't for you. Alright, now Ion's out of the room. I think we can all agree that Sekiro has an amazing combat flow that is insanely satisfying to pick up and master. While Bloodborne brought aggression to the forefront for Souls games, I actually think that Sekiro deciding to pull it back and make fights more of a push and pull situation had a better impact on Soulsborne as a whole. In Sekiro, you are taught to deflect everything, from regular enemies all the way up to the big boss fights. If you understand how to tastefully press that block button at the right time, you can overcome almost everything in the game. Perilous attacks break up the monotony, and depending on the type, even give you opportunities to strike back. Sure, you have to jump away from grabs, but if it's an underleg sweep, you can bounce on your opponent's head, and if it's a thrust, Makiri counter makes it free real estate. You've got shinobi tools to help mitigate some of the trouble, with many of them having fun interactions with certain mini-bosses and bosses. I think about the loaded spear in the Guardian Ape fight, or the firecrackers against horseback enemies in the Blazing Bulls, the shuriken and Lady Butterfly when she's in midair. I do still firmly believe that Sekiro struggles with group combat, and I really wish we had access to something like a smoke bomb to de-aggro regular enemies. If Owl can use them in his battles, we should also be allowed to use them without needing to resort to the blood smoke ninjutsu. But ultimately, there is nothing quite like knowing the moveset of a tough boss and just watching that posture bar of theirs fill up to the brim. Because you know the moment they stagger and you get a death blow, it is gonna feel great. Sekiro may not be my favorite or even my aesthetic, but by god, did From Software make killing opponents feel fantastic. We've made it to FromSoft's most recent franchise, Elden Ring. And earlier on in the Dark Souls segment, I said that Elden Ring was in the running for interconnective level design. But Elden Ring takes what Dark Souls started and transforms it into a continent-wide scale. Dark Souls is interconnectivity built on a world of verticality. You're always going up or down, but you're often going in one of those two directions. Elden Ring is much the same, with the Lands Between and the Realm of Shadow World maps both championing the concept of elevation-based progression. In the Lands Between, you are constantly rising further and further up as you ascend to the Erd Tree and beyond to the mountaintops of the Giants. And yet the map is more connected than that because you have these sprawling underground cave systems and cities that connect regions together. Eastern Limgrave and Northern Caelid are connected via Shifra River. In order to reach the Moonlight Altar in southwest Liurnia, you have to explore Ainsel River in the north. And deep beneath Leyndell are the Deeproot Depths, where one of the game's most important historical NPCs lies, or at least his corpse does. But Shadow of the Erdtree took things to an entirely new level. With a smaller map, they instead decided to focus on layering areas atop each other, and because of the open world, you're able to see every area you can visit from any elevation point on the map. You can see Charo's hidden grave and the Cerulean coast from the very start of the DLC. You can spot the jagged peak off in the distance, or look up to see the Shadow Keep looming over Shadow Altus. And the way you find a lot of these areas requires you to explore specific dungeons, or find obscure pathways down the rivers, or encounter an illusory wall in a legacy dungeon. Dark Souls may have built its world on top of each other, but Elden Ring provides a scope to that elevation interconnectivity that makes it far more impactful as a result. I just love being able to turn around and look back at the route I came from, or to chart a course to some faraway location down a chasm because I've noticed a small series of gravestones I can parkour across. And the way the world continued to expand just blew everyone's minds. I have no clue how they're going to top Elden Ring and that feeling of exploration, but I cannot wait to see what they bring to the table. And now we come to Nightreign, a game that did not exist last time I tackled a video concept like this, and I would love to say that it does multiplayer the best in the franchise, but FromSoft haven't invented cross-platform play, so I can't fucking play this game with any of my actual friends, so I'm not picking multiplayer here out of spite. Instead, let's talk about build variety through the use of the different Nightfarers. Obviously, once you get to endgame Deep of Night, everyone's using the same relics and weapon types, but when you're playing through the main story and the DLC, swapping between NPCs to complete their remembrance quests, you end up experiencing so many different playstyles. In regular Elden Ring and in most Souls games, I tend to shy away from changing my build once I've decided on a comfortable weapon and stat allocation, but Nightreign's random chance with what weapons you draw, what effects you gain, and what bosses you face force you to adapt on the fly with builds you've never considered in other titles. The Recluse has spoiled us with how versatile she is using magic, but it does make me want to jump back into Elden Ring, respec into an intelligence character, collect a few spells, and go nuts. Raider gives that unga bunga energy, Duchess showcases how fun mixed stat builds can be with her Spellblade style of combat, Wilder gives us that generic experience we all know and love, Guardian is perfect for people who have only ever dodged and want to experience the joys of having a shield, I has elevated what a bow build can be, and I think FromSoft need to embrace that in their next game. Revenant might actually make Elden Ring players use spirit summons, Executor might actually make Elden Ring players play Sekiro, Scholar makes status effects fun, And the Undertaker, I mean, she's not doing anything unique with her build variety, but her ultimate's fucking funny. I very firmly believe that Nightreign is only going to help players to try out more builds in FromSoft's older titles, after experiencing how fun they can be in Nightreign. And that, my friends, is the power of repurposing content. And that's my list. Could you tell this script ran out of steam during the Nightreign entry? Let me know down below, and be sure to parry that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all my future videos. I want to give a shout out to my YouTube channel members for supporting me for another month. It's $4.99. You get a shout out in the description and at the end of videos as well, and you get access to my Dark Souls 2 and Dark Souls 3 Soul Level 1 runs. Thank you so much. If you guys want to follow me, I've got Discord, bit controversial at the moment. I've got a Twitch, I've got a Blue Sky, and I stream 3 to 4 times a week here on YouTube. Might be live right now, you should maybe go check. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time. Adios.